we are going to be finding out and understanding a new unit that we are introducing today, a new module. We are going to call it Public and Private Sector Procurement. So basically, we intend to understand various conversations around procurement, private procurement, public sector procurement, simply to understand how it is done and how organizations in the private sector are doing it, how public organizations, governments are doing it. Of course, different countries are governed by a law. Most of things that governments are doing, private sector is doing, the public sector is doing, they are governed by a certain law. So conversations around public and private sector procurement are protected by a certain law. And in the East Africa, when you look at different countries, you're going to find that they have the Public Procurement and Disposal Bill. So find out from your country the most recent enacted bill, because there are so many amendments that are done. Now, when you go to the purpose of that bill, why is the Procurement and Disposal Bill in existence in different countries around East Africa and even across the world? So the law is basically meant to provide a regulatory framework for establishing and governing an open, transparent, and a rigorous system of public procurement. So it puts in place what we need to do and what we need to follow in order to be able to ensure that the public procurement, the private procurement is well managed by a certain law. The reason why we have this kind of laws is also to provide rules and procedures that are going to guide us based on the budgets that we have. And very, very importantly, also, we need to streamline our procurement sector. We know that is a sector that is riddled with a lot of corruption, a lot of mismanagement of funds. So we need to have a clear direction provided by this law on where we intend to be. Then also we have public procurement. We are defining it, and we are saying is the process through which the government acquires or buys goods, services, works from the private sector. So every government has projects that are running. Every government is a consumer of goods and services, and therefore these are critical components of public procurement. So it involves the government acquiring goods and services. Now, we're also saying the public sector refers to organizations owned and controlled by the government. That's also a very important clarification. When you're talking about public procurement or public sector organizations, what exactly are we referring to? And we are saying the purpose of the establishment of these organizations is to provide public services and delivery of different services to the citizens of a country, national health services. So we have a lot of procurement around the national health services. For example, the procurement of medical drugs, the procurement of medical machinery. It could be imaging machinery and so on and so forth. National Defense Forces or national defense, where majorly we could be procuring uniforms of our defense forces, we could be procuring guns and so many other things, so many other goods and services. So procurement also in terms of roads. So tenders are floated for people to build roads, street lighting, just to mention but a few. So the public sector is quite wide. We are saying this particular sector, the public sector, is governed by public procurement rules. And in most countries, there is a law that governs procurement of goods, just like I've stated about that particular law. So find out in your country whether you have a public procurement and disposal law that governs how these things are done. And then the purpose of having these rules, the procurement rules, basically to manage procurement methods and procurement activities. So they are critical functions and critical things that we need to have. And then we are also saying the public procurement discussion must adhere to certain principles. Now, when we talk about principles in public procurement, we are talking about the guidelines and standards that are going to govern the process of acquiring goods, services, or construction of projects. So these principles we are talking about, they are laws that are going to be protecting the sector. So the question would be now, what would be the purpose of these laws? Number one, we need to ensure fairness. That's why we establish those laws. Yeah, so that not a single supplier all the time will be receiving contracts for A, B, C, D. And then also we need to ensure transparency in the procurement of activities. We need to ensure that governments, private organizations are efficient when it comes to the delivery of services. If we begin a road today and it has a timeline, the contractors have to meet that timeline, because we have principles that guide even how we decide who should be able to be given the contract. So these guidelines are also important because they provide accountability, they provide value for money, and so on and so forth. Remember, in the public sector, of course, this is money for the public, so it needs to be prudently utilized. So some of the few examples of what we call the principles now. We have what we call the principle of competitive bidding. So we want people to competitively bid for the work, bid to supply the goods, bid to supply the services. We also have the principle of efficiency, the principle of accountability, the principle of ethical conduct. Some of the things that I quoted as purpose of these guidelines are also the principles themselves. Now, when you talk about more understanding on the introduction part of public and private sector procurement, we say that the items involved in public procurement, we have already mentioned this a while back, are including goods, services such as cleaning services, to a large commercial projects such as the development of infrastructure, roads, power stations. I'm sure these are the things that are happening in your country. So a combination of all those things are those things that the public is looking for their governments to be able to provide. And the other one is public sector procurement. We are saying this is the procurement of goods and services and works by private organizations. Sorry, this one is private sector procurement. The previous two slides, we are focused more on the public sector. So whatever is here is the private sector. So this one is procurement, but it is done by private organizations or individuals, usually for fulfillment of a number of objectives. So it could be for investment purposes, it could be for resale or direct consumption of certain goods. And we are saying the key agenda when we are doing procurement in the private sector, we want to emphasize on objectives. And the main objective in this discussion under the private sector, every private entity is focusing on maximizing on their profits. Now, we now look at the scope of public procurement. So we are saying that public procurement involves a number of things. Yeah. And these things include who are the players. We can also ask ourselves, who are the players in the public procurement space? Number one, and very, very important, is the central government. And this is going to comprise all ministries which provide vital services. A bigger percentage of countries in Africa are having a similar version of the nature of their government. So they have the central government, then they have the states, or in other countries, the county governments. So the central government is a crucial player in the public sector procurement. And their key areas of focus, of course, includes education, it includes health, it includes security, it includes transport and works. So this is a very, very crucial sector that we cannot avoid. And so many people are interested in becoming government suppliers in relation to the education sector. When it comes to the education sector, governments, for example, the Kenyan government, as a percentage of textbooks that they provide to every learner, we have suppliers that are supplying that particular item. Others will supply school uniform. Others are going to supply food items. We have county governments that are providing food for their learners every day. So it is a crucial kind of a sector also. The health sector, I've talked about drugs, I've talked about healthcare machinery, including imaging machinery and so on and so forth. The security, I gave examples of all that. And then also the scope of public procurement is going to include the local governments. This could also be now what countries are calling states, county governments. But now these kind of institutions provide these activities at the local level, probably where the bigger population of different citizens in the country are in. And then finally is the public-owned service providers. So these kind of providers are established by acts of parliament to provide services. For example, the National Examination Board, National Revenue Authority, University of Juba. We have quite a number of those public-owned service providers. So service providers in the context that when we are talking about the National Examination Board, and this particular institution is in charge of all the exams in a country, the national exams. We also need to find out tonight on the importance of public and in economic development. So why are we doing procurement? Why don't countries and citizens just advertise a product and a person X will always be given the contract or the supplies of goods or services? So the reason why the government is having all these goods and services being delivered and supplied to them. Number one, they want to ensure infrastructure development. So they want to ensure there is continuous construction of roads, hospitals, and also create jobs by having those projects running, and also stimulate the economic activity and also enhance the overall quality of life. So when we are doing a school, when we are doing a bridge, when we are doing a road, when we are doing an hospital in terms of construction, then people are receiving jobs, and in return their life is going to improve. Then we have we also want to develop the local industry. government procurement can support the growth and development of local industries. So we can award contracts to domestic companies. Governments can stimulate local manufacturing, and so on and so forth. They can decide every clothing that government staff is wearing should be gotten from the local manufacturing plant. So that is something very, very crucial to be able to understand. Another importance is to aid in market stability. The public procurement provides a stable and predictable market for goods and services, especially during economic downtowns. And then, of course, the stability of the market sometimes is also dependent on what the government is doing in terms of projects, how much money they are releasing in form of salaries for people to be able to benefit. And that's why we are saying consistent demand from the public sector can help businesses stabilize their operations and maintain their workforce, contributing to the economic stability. Another importance of public and private procurement in economic development is in regards to technology transfer and innovation. And we are saying public procurement projects are often going to involve the adoption and integration of new technologies. For example, we can have new technologies around the building of roads. That means that, for instance, the contractor will decide on terms of technology, the kind of raw materials they are going to use, the kind of machinery they are going to use, and so on and so forth. And when we are adopting this technology, those people that are employed in that particular space at that particular moment, they are also receiving knowledge in terms of the use of this technology. So they are also, as we adopt new technology, once as governments are executing projects, we are also doing what we call capacity building. And then also, due to that, industries are going to grow, individuals are going to grow, and all the economy is going to grow. We also would like to look at the differences between the private sector and the public sector. Number one, of course, is in regards to the objectives. And we are saying on the side of the private sector, like we had said in one of the slides briefly, the key focus is in terms of increasing profit. While in the public sector, we are focusing on offering services. That's very, very crucial. And the other one is responsibility. So we are saying in the private sector, buyers are responsible to directors, who in turn are responsible to shareholders. While in the public sector, buyers are ultimately responsible to the general public. So in the private sector, everything we are doing procurement or requesting for goods to be supplied, we want to ensure that the buyers, our customers, are happy, and also it trickles up to ensure also the directors are happy. So buyers are responsible for ultimately to the general public. That is under the public sector. Another difference is in terms of legal restrictions. In the private sector, activities are regulated by company law, employment law, productivity and product liability law. I would also want you to take time and find out, what does the company law in your country state? What does the employment law state? Because these are laws that countries have. And then you're also saying in the public sector, most of these applies equally to public sector, but additional regulations are present. So, for example, part of the regulations that are in the public sector now are compulsory competitive tendering. I think I had mentioned that word under the principles. So, within the public sector, we want very many people to apply to supply either goods or services. Then from there, we can be able to choose the best. Sometimes we could use the rule of the lowest bidder. Of course, we need to compare everybody that is offering the service. How much are they charging? Another difference is in regards to competition between the private sector. In private sector, there's usually a strong competition between many different firms. While in the public sector, there is usually no competition. It is all about everybody tendering and us choosing the best person to be able to supply the goods. Other differences are in terms of publicity. In the private sector, we are saying there is confidentiality that applies in dealing between suppliers and buyers. So I may not really know, or you may not really know, who is delivering goods and services in a company X, for example, in Juba or in Nairobi. But if it is a public engagement, yeah, the public is aware, and that's why we are saying it is limited because of public interest in disclosure. So those that tender may know what is happening around, yeah, in the public sector. Information exchange, we are going to say under the private sector, buyers do not exchange information with other firms because of confidentiality and competition. If I know, for instance, today you have quoted like $1,000 or 1 million US dollars for delivering of some goods or some services, then I could decide, let me, for instance, quote a lower amount and see if I am going to qualify. Yeah, but we are saying in the public sector, buyers are willing to exchange notes freely. That's a very, very interesting difference. Now, we also want to look at the similarities between the public and private sector. What are some of the things that are similar in both instances? We are saying while we have some differences, like we have seen them, we have a few similarities. Those things that are the same. Number one is in terms of procurement objectives, where both the public and the private are going to share a common objective of acquiring goods, works, or services to meet specific needs. Yeah, so it is whether it is government or private, the procurement process will always aim to fulfill organizational goals and support operational activities. So the goal and the objective is one. If the private sector is looking for supply of goods and the public sector, for example, the government is looking for supply of goods, everybody wants to get the best in the market, for example. Other similarities are in terms of supplier selection. In both public and private procurement, the process involves the selection of suppliers or vendors to provide the required goods and services. And this is going to typically involve supplier selection. So in both instances, whether private or public, we have to do supplier selection. And it's going to bring us to that point where we choose the best supplier to be able to assist us in delivering of goods and services. And it also, in both instances, we also do evaluation of proposals, bids, and choosing the most suitable supplier based on a predefined criteria. The other one is another similarity is in regards to the value for money, and we are saying in both we seek to achieve value for money. Yeah. This is going to mean that we get the best in terms of quality, price, and other relevant factors in the procurement process. So both private and public, we can also say that they are seeking to get the best service or good at the least amount that is possible that they can be able to get it. That's what we say in private, they want to maximize on profit. So if there are avenues that you can increase your profit, maybe choosing supplier A of course, you have analyzed and found even if they're charging a lesser amount, they are still able to meet the aspects that we are talking about in terms of quality, price, and other procurement factors. We have also similarities in regards to contract management. Both public and private procurement involve contract management. So once the procurement process is completed and a supplier is selected, a contract is typically established. So in both instances, private and public, we have the issues of having a formal contractual document that shows the relationship. And it's going to be also outlining the rights and obligations of both. So with the current nature of the world today, it is very dangerous to get into these procurement deals without any written documentation, because we have a lot of entities, even public governments, that are not paying. You go find people, suppliers have even gotten into depression. They offered services, they constructed roads, buildings, schools, and the government did not pay them. So when you have the contractual part, then you can seek legal redress. You can go to present your documentation for whatever entity, whether private and public, to be compelled to pay you. And then the other one is in regards to risk management. We are saying both public and private procurement require managing risks associated with procurement processes. So this is going to include identifying potential risks, implementing mitigating strategies, and also we need to come up and establish mechanisms to address unforeseen circumstances. For example, many governments are going to tell you for you to qualify for the supply of these goods and services, you need to have money in advance, because they don't pay before you offer the goods and service. So what kind of risk could be associated or could come with that kind of an issue? That's a question that we need to ask ourselves. And then also other similarities are around the ethical and legal considerations. We are saying both public and private procurement should adhere to ethical standards and legal requirements. Yes. Ethical standards means whether we are private or public, then there are rules that stipulate how we are going to conduct ourselves. And it is going to revolve around what I discussed in our past slides. Issues around fairness, what level of fairness, transparency, integrity, their procurement processes. And we are seeing also we must comply with applicable laws, regulations, codes of conduct to promote good governance and prevent corruption and unethical practices. And finally, when you are looking at the similarities between the public and private, we are also considering the aspect of supplier relationship. So in the private and the public sector, a key objective in terms of how we relate to our suppliers is both the institutions want to have a positive relationship with their suppliers. And they're saying this is very, very critical. How do we ensure effective and a positive supplier relationship management? Number one, we need to include communication. We need to include good collaboration between suppliers and the entities, whether private or public. And we also need to and ongoing evaluation of supplier performance. So we cannot stay with suppliers 30, 20 years. We do not evaluate their output. We do not know how to perform, and so on and so forth. So supplier evaluation is part of building a relationship, so that if your supplier has not met the obligations that you set out for them, then you can be able to provide avenues for them to improve or decide to look for another supplier. So that relationship is important, and it is similar to either side, the private or public. Sometimes I see governments when they have given a contract to somebody to construct a road and they have not done it. Then midway I see governments stopping that contract, especially if it is a delay on the contractor side. They are doing a shoddy job and so on and so forth. So evaluation is very, very critical. And that is going to the discussion around similarities uh, between public and private sector. That supply relationship is the last point of the lecture. And I believe the discussion has been of help to you. So we're going to stop at that point and look forward for another lecture tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Mwanda. We have really enjoyed